Dufu beside Serpentine Lake. The old man from Shaoling chokes back his sobs, wandering the bends of Serpentine furtively on a spring day. The riverside palaces have locked their 1,000 doors. For whom do the weeping willows send forth their new green shoots? I remember the empress banner like a rainbow over the lotus pool garden, and everything in the park aflame with new color. The first lady of Zhaojiang Palace rode beside the emperor in his carriage. Maids of honor riding before carried bows and arrows. Their white horses champed at golden bridles as they bent back their bodies and loosed arrows at the clouds. The lady laughed in delight as one brought down a pair of wings. The bright eyes, the gleaming teeth. Where are they now? Tainted with blood, her wandering soul cannot return. The Wei River flows eastward, and Yangtze Pass is far away. He who left and she who stayed can no longer exchange news. It is only human to have feelings and soak our bosoms with tears, but the river's water and its flowers never change and never care. In the twilight, the city is filled with the dust of barbarian horsemen. I want to go to the South City, but my gaze keeps straying north. So, yet another of Du Fu's ballads, and this ballad flows very naturally from the previous one we have read. It's a very appropriate continuation. If in a ballad of lovely women we had the depiction of the power and the splendor, even the decadent splendor and power of Emperor Shenzong's late court, and especially the power of the Prime Minister Jiang Guochong and of the women of the Jiang family, above all Jiang Guifei, although she didn't appear explicitly in that poem, only her sisters. In this poem, we get the aftermath. It is, as it were, the consequences of the corruption that the Yang clan exerted over the emperor, and which led to his carelessness and to his folly, to his not paying the correct attention to matters of state, and as a consequence, to the partial success of the Anlushan rebellion, which almost brought the country to its knees and almost destroyed the dynasty. So this poem is set in the capital. It's set in Chang'an, and it's set in the same Serpentine park in which the previous poem takes place. The timing of this poem would be 4 or 5 years later after the previous one. And so much has changed since then. The Anlushan rebellion, as we said, has broke out. It has taken the two capitals of the empire, including Chang'an. The emperor has run away to the province of Shu, having had to sacrifice his prime minister and his beloved concubine. His son has snatched away his imperial title from him and is forming a court in exile in the north. And the capital, being occupied by barbarian troops, has been sacked, many buildings have been burned, and many people have run away or have been murdered. So this poem is describing us how things are right now at the Serpentine. The poem starts with a very brief introduction, a paragraph that talks about the old man from Shaoling, which is an obvious alter ego for Du Fu himself. Probably he was at the moment at the capital himself, we might guess. And he is visiting the park just as he visited it many times in the past, but now how different things are. So the spaces, the nature might be the same, but the humans are not. And time, the dimension of time, has completely altered things, even if space keeps being the same. So what's the topic of this poem? Well, The main topic of this poem is reminiscing and lamenting the past glories and the past happiness, which is mainly focused through one episode, an imperial evening of pleasure in this very same park that took place some unspecified time in the past, where the emperor went hunting with his favorite concubine, and there was just pleasure and happiness and the good old days. The poetic persona of Du Fu is walking the park and remembering those days and contrasting them with the present. And while doing so, he mentions some almost contemporary events to the writing of the poem, including the exile, the self-imposed exile of the emperor in Shu, and the death of his concubine. The poem, so that's the main topic of the poem, reminiscing the past, contrasting the present of war and death with the past of imperial happiness and pleasure. Related to this topic is what I've said, the idea that nature, the world keeps going on in spite of all horrible empire toppling battles, warfare, strife. Nature keeps going on, and perhaps the people just keep going on. These empire shattering events, these wars, these campaigns are just the ripples on the top of a pool, but the water and the fish that live below the waves keep to their lives as usual. And so there is this poignancy, this contrast, all the more felt because it was a very common staple of Chinese correlative thought in philosophy and religion to believe that nature resounded and responded to human social action. So the actions of the emperor brought about, some believed, good weather, good rain, or bad weather, or unusual natural phenomena. Whether or not the cultured classes still believed in these things in the Tang, and I imagine a big percentage of them still believed in them, whether they believed it or not, it did become a poetic conceit, this contrasting relationship between nature and humankind. Poems that complain of nature not responding to human suffering, and also poems where there is a matching between the sadness or happiness of the season and the sadness and happiness of the humans living in it. Another element of the poem, and this is the last topic before we start analyzing it bit by bit, is present in its conclusion. And in its conclusion, we get the doubts of the poet. The poet does not know where to go, north or south, and that dilemma is a political dilemma. The Confucian scholar official has to decide, should he go to his family or should he go to the court in exile to serve the new emperor? So, serving, evidently the poet, however harshly he might have criticized the family, the young clan and the decadent debauchery of the previous emperor, the poet suffers for the calamities that have befallen his country and still wishes to serve and do the best, even if with conflicting loyalties. And he also feels sad for the loss of that golden time, which was not just a time of decadence and pleasure for the emperor and his wife and her relatives. It was a time of general prosperity for most of the people in the Tang Empire, a remembered golden age whose spectre would haunt not only the rest of the Tang Dynasty's history, but all Chinese history, in fact. Let's go on with the parts of the poem. You could say there is an intro. The first two lines probably introduce the character and the place. So we have an old man walking through the Serpentine and lamenting the present sights and sighing for the old glories. The main part of the poem, after a description of the current misery of the capital, in fact, the description of the current events of the capital acts as a framing device. We get very briefly the description of the abandoned park, and close to the end we get the description of the city in twilight. So bracketing a memory of the past in this park is the contemporary realities of war and harshness. But before continuing with this description of those hardships, a reminiscence makes itself felt in Du Fu's time, and he remembers an episode. That's the third part of the poem, you could say, which is, as I say, is sandwiched between the second one. And here we get this happy moment of the past. But as soon as that description is finished, we get the information of the death and separation of emperor and concubine, the harsh realities of the capital, and the doubts of Du Fu himself. So let's go bit by bit as usual. The old man from Shaoling chokes back his sobs, wandering the bends of Serpentine furtively on a spring day. So the old man from Shaoling was in the outskirts of Chang'an, and this is one of the nicknames that Du Fu used for himself because his ancestors came from the Shaolin region. So he is the old man from Shaoling. He's crying. He has reasons enough to lament the warfare and the devastation of the capital, and he is visiting the park furtively. Perhaps it's dangerous to walk around the capital while it's being occupied by foreign troops. The riverside palaces have locked their 1,000 doors. For whom do the weeping willows send forth their new green shoots? So the Serpentine is partly abandoned. The palaces, the pavilions that were there still are there, but they're closed. The aristocracy has either fled or been massacred, or is keeping in hiding away from the new masters of the city. And again, this contrast between nature showing itself to no avail this time. The weeping willows show their beautiful greenery, but now there's no one to appreciate and to enjoy it. So with this, we get into the memories of Du Fu, of that episode in the past. I remember the Emperor's banner, like a rainbow over the lotus pool garden, and everything in the park, aflame with new color. The First Lady of Zhaojiang Palace rode beside the Emperor in his carriage. Maids of honor riding before carried bows and arrows. Their white horses champed at golden bridles as they bent back their bodies and loosed arrows at the clouds. The lady laughed in delight as one brought down a pair of wings. So here we get the reminiscence. It was in this same park. The emperor was there. His flag was flying over the pool. He was with the First Lady of Zhaojiang. Now, the First Lady of Zhaojiang, that's a nickname for one of the concubines or wives of a Han emperor of the Han dynasty, of Emperor Cheng. So this was about 700 years before the time of Du Fu. And although this poem, as we've seen in previous poems, it's not decorous and perhaps even dangerous to make too explicit the fact that Du Fu is making a ballad about contemporary events. In fact, we mentioned in the previous poem that Du Fu started this trend for writing ballad poems about contemporary issues. So there is a little bit of equivocation, not much, by, instead of mentioning Jiang Guifei by name, mentioning the name of another wife of an emperor, another concubine that had been highly privileged by an emperor of the remote past. But this is Jiang Guifei. So Jiang Guifei, under this pretended name, is in a carriage with the emperor, and it's a hunting outing. They are shooting birds, and they catch some, and the lady laughs. So that's a beautiful, lovely memory from the past. But that's the past. Let's go back to the present with a few lines that remember us a lot. The Ubisund topic of Western poetry. What happened to those powerful and beautiful people of the past who are now dead? The bright eyes, the gleaming teeth. Where are they now? Tainted with blood. Her wandering soul cannot return. The Wei River flows eastward, and Jianghe Pass is far away. He who left and she who stayed can no longer exchange news. So the present is not the emperor enjoying his concubine. The present is the separation and death of the lovers. The soul of Jiang Guifei, murdered at the Wei River, at Ma Wei, close to the Wei River, Her soul is stained in blood and cannot return. As for the emperor, he crossed the Jianghe Pass. We've talked about this. It was the Sword Gate Pass, which led into the land of Shu. The emperor crossed that pass that is far away from the capital, and he can't return yet. No communication is possible now between she who stayed and died and he who left. So, after describing this, the poet makes the following brief, generic comment on human sadness as opposed to natural splendor. It is only human to have feelings and soak our bosoms with tears, but the river's water and its flowers never change and never care. So nature does not seem to react to human tragedy. Nature keeps going on and keeps blossoming. Humans have to live and suffer. Nature will keep on going. The world will keep on going as it is. And the conclusion, we are back at the present of the occupied capital, and at the doubts that the poet might have about what to do with himself. In the twilight, the city is filled with the dust of barbarian horsemen. I want to go to the South City, but my gaze keeps straying north. So it's twilight, maybe the twilight of the dynasty, not only the twilight of the day. The capital is dangerous, and Du Fu has to think and has to plan about what he is going to do himself, or what he might be able to do. Will he be able to escape the occupied capital? Will he be able to avoid being pressed into service? I believe he wasn't able to avoid this. I think the Anlushan regime forced him, on pain of death, to go to Luoyang and serve for a time in the rebel government. And that brought him some troubles later. But anyway, here he is considering two possibilities. I want to go to the South City. His family was in the South. But my gaze keeps straying north. North, as we mentioned, was the place where a court in exile had been set by one of the sons of Emperor Xuanzong, Emperor Suzong, and with help from foreigners and taking advantage of the infighting of the rebels. A couple of years later, I think in 757, if not earlier, the western capital, Chang'an, was recovered by the troops of Suzong. So, pretty dark poem at a dark time, but very effective. As they say, interesting times, by which we mean horrible times for people, times of warfare, chaos, generally help to make poetry great. It's a price that nobody probably would like to pay, but once you have to live in interesting times, at least it's good to take the opportunity to make interesting poetry.